After President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, then Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as the new president, and there's many that believe he was involved in the Kennedy assassination. And if you watch the last episode in the series, it looks like he might have been involved in the cover-up anyways. And with Johnson in power, the conflict in Vietnam would grow exponentially in the following years. And in 1967, another war was looming in the Middle East, which would erupt on June 5, 1967, between Israel against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, who all also had support from other Arab countries. This is what would become known as the Six-Day War. Egypt and Israel each blamed the other for starting the war. And there were, of course, multiple tensions and actions preceding the actual outbreak of war, but we now know with hindsight that it was actually Israel who started the attack by bombing and destroying Egypt's air force in the early morning hours of June 5th. But it's on the waters of the Eastern Mediterranean 3 days later that our story takes place. This is the story of the U.S.S. Liberty. On the morning of June 8, 1967, the U.S.S. Liberty was in the Eastern Mediterranean and in international waters about 15 miles off the coast and heading northwest to a distance of 25 miles northwest of Arish. And at a little after 5 in the morning, they were overflown by Israeli reconnaissance planes. And this would be the first of 8 flybys by different Israeli reconnaissance planes over the next few hours.
They were slowly lumbering over our ship, and we were waving at them, they were waving at us.
They were sophisticated, almost as sophisticated as we were as far as surveillance and technology. They had everything. We supplied them with all the technology, to this day.
And I felt that we were in great shape because they knew who we were.
They're our friends. We felt safe. Actually, it was a secure feeling to see them.
We had an American flag flying, the standard, and then we put up the holiday colors, which is a huge American flag. And it was a bright sunny day with the wind blowing, I don't know, 5 or 10 knots, the flag was unfurled. You could see it for miles.
The flybys would continue until early afternoon, and it was just a nice bright sunny day on the deep blue of the Mediterranean until all hell would break loose.
Sun was shining, blue sky, clouds, nice, people sunbathing on the deck. We had lunch, and 5 minutes later maybe, here came the jets, and nobody really knew what was happening until they started firing at us.
At just after 2 p.m., 2 Israeli Mirage 3 jets came swooping in, delivering payloads of death and destruction. And not too long after, they were joined by 3 Super Mystere jets. All were firing rockets and cannons at the Liberty, and the Super Mysteres also dropped napalm on the Liberty. And here's a photo taken of one of them during the attack.
There were over 820 large caliber strikes on the ship, including napalm. There were 2 napalm bombs dropped onto us, rockets, and 40-millimeter cannon fire, which makes a pretty big hole.
And as you can see, the holes in the ship from the plane's cannon fire were making the U.S.S. Liberty look like Swiss cheese. The Liberty was defenseless as well, with only 4 machine guns that were meant for repelling boarders only, and they were targeted right away.
The captain said to me, alert the forward gun mounts, we're under attack. And I tried to raise the 2 sailors in the forward gun mounts. I looked out and they were blown to pieces by the rocket.
Also, when the attack had begun, they took out all the Liberty's antennas and were jamming the Liberty's communication frequencies.
When the attack started and we realized that we needed help, we tried to communicate with the Sixth Fleet.
They were jamming both our distress frequencies and our tactical frequencies. The tactical frequencies is all right, but the international distress frequencies is a violation of international law to jam them, and the Israelis were jamming them.
And we could not get a signal across. Here's the question I have to ask. Who would know the frequencies other than an ally? And who was the ally in the war? It wasn't Egypt. It was Israel. They would know, and only they would know in this conflict, what our frequencies would be.
And according to some of the crew of the Liberty, the attacking planes had no markings.
In the attack, no one saw any markings, and some of the men told me later that they made a special effort to identify them, and they swear that there were no markings, that these airplanes were unmarked.
With over half the ship on fire and taking cannon and rocket fire for almost a half an hour from the jets trying to sink the Liberty, the aerial attack would come to an end. And this is because the Liberty managed to get an SOS call out to the 6th Fleet, who were 500 miles away, but could launch aircraft that could reach the Liberty.
We had one whip antenna which hadn't worked the entire cruise, and it had a bullet hole in it. One of the radio men had taken a reel of coax cable and ran it from one of the transmitters back there to that whip antenna, and took some shrapnel in the process. He got out a mayday. Firefox, Firefox, this is Rock Star. Under attack by unidentified surface and naval air units, require immediate assistance.
And we'll come back to this point in a while. But next, right after the Israeli jets left, 3 Israeli torpedo boats like these pictured here appeared on the horizon. And this is a photo of one of the attacking torpedo boats.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, the 3 torpedo boats approached us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
And now an attack by sea would begin, and they fired 5 torpedoes at the Liberty. And here's a picture taken as the ship was evading one of them. Unfortunately for the crew below decks, one of the torpedoes found its mark. The torpedo struck the ship in the middle of the starboard side, right where all the electronics communication equipment was. "25 of the Liberty's crew were killed in the massive blast.
The torpedo threw us up in the air like a roller coaster. It felt like one coming down. Dead silence, lights all off, smoke and haze everywhere.
Here's an example of how much of an impact the torpedo had when hitting the ship the size of the U.S.S. Liberty. And the torpedo boats kept up the attack, firing armor-piercing bullets.
The armor-piercing, the shells that they were using were leaving holes about that big around in the metal plating. Just peeled it out like it was orange peel. This bullet was retrieved from one of the navigational books at the rear portion of the bridge. It had penetrated the skin of the ship, gone through at least one other book, and then stopped in the second book. This is part of an armor-piercing shell. The outer portion or jacket makes the hole that this then goes through.
It was like sitting in a cardboard box and having somebody shoot through it. The bullets were just coming everywhere.
And as the gunboats circled and showered the Liberty with bullets, there was literally nowhere to find refuge from the carnage.
The ship was fired at from port to starboard, starboard to port, stem to stern, and there was not a single compartment above the waterline that did not have one or more direct penetration by a rocket, machine gun, and they also dropped napalm on the bridge of the ship.
And the Israeli torpedo boats were taking out all the Liberty's lifeboats as well.
We basically were dead in the water. The word came down, prepare to abandon ship. That meant prepare only, go up and get ready, get near the life rafts. Well, I went up first, popped the hatch, looked out for the life rafts. They were either gone or burning. And at the same moment, I looked to the stern of the ship, and I saw one of the torpedo boats methodically machine gunning one of our life rafts that had floated back. We cut the life rafts loose because they were burning or had been damaged. And they floated back behind us, and he was machine gunning the life raft. And I knew that had there been anyone in there, they certainly wouldn't be alive.
There were meant to be no survivors. The combined air and sea attacks lasted over an hour, ending at around 3:15 p.m. when the torpedo boats finally turned away. And the Sixth Fleet wouldn't arrive to help until the next morning. Out of a total complement of 294 personnel, 34 were killed, and 172 were injured. So how could this catastrophe have happened? An hour after the attack ended, Israel contacted the White House and informed them they had erroneously attacked a U.S. ship and offered apologies. And that's the story that was accepted. It was an error. And they had mistakenly attacked the Liberty. At first they tried to say the Liberty had no identification, which of course was BS. The Liberty was flying the U.S. flag, was painted in the usual U.S. Navy gray, with huge white hull markings on both the bow and the stern of the ship. GTR-5, which stands for General Technical Research, the fifth ship of her class. Israel said they mistook the Liberty for an Egyptian ship, the Al-Qasir, which was only a little over half the size of the Liberty, painted black, with its hull markings written in red and Arabic. It's just not credible to believe that for over an hour, multiple Israeli pilots and torpedo boat personnel could have all been so mistaken for so long. And in the official Israeli explanation, we can see that in the CIA memorandum, in which the first page is still redacted to this day, Israel said they made a series of mistakes that led to the attack. The first mistake they said was that they were convinced their positions near El Arish were being shelled by an unidentified ship. But this supposed shelling never actually happened. There were no other ships in the area at all. The second mistake they say was that the torpedo boats reported an unidentified vessel that was steaming at 28 to 30 knots. And again, this couldn't have happened because the Liberty's top speed was only 21 knots, and they were the only ship in the area. And then there's the third mistake, that the attacking Israeli forces mistook the Liberty for the Egyptian transport, the Al-Qasir. Initially, President Johnson didn't believe it was an accident. From the minutes of a National Security Council meeting on the following day, June 9th, President Johnson said that it was inconceivable, that it was an accident. Let's have a listen to Richard Helms, who was the CIA director at the time of the Liberty attack, and what he had to say about President Johnson.
I think the feeling was that the pressure, political pressure, would be too much, and they were just going to let it go. That and thought it maybe would just go away. As a matter of fact, he said to me, standing in the cabinet room one day, "Have you looked at the New York Times? The attack on that American ship is on page 29. when it should have been on the front page. And then I guess various people got at him and so forth, and he changed his mind. But or I don't think he changed his mind, he just changed his actions.
In other words, Richard Helms is saying that President Johnson always knew it was a deliberate attack, but changed his actions to allow the cover-up. A cover-up that persists to this day. A cover-up of his own actions by the looks of things as well. Here's the comm records of communications during the attack. And we can see the U.S.S. Saratoga first received the distress call from the U.S.S. Liberty at 2:35 p.m. And that's the time where the Liberty was, just north of the Sinai Peninsula. The way to read the data time group is the first 2 digits equals the day. The next 4 digits is the time of day, followed by a Z for Zulu. And Zulu is Greenwich Mean Time, and where the Liberty was attacked is 2 hours after Greenwich Mean Time. So 08-12-35 Zulu, June, where the Liberty is June 8th, 2:35 p.m. A couple minutes later at 2:37 p.m., we see reports of the torpedo boats approaching the Liberty. At 2:50 p.m., we see the commander of the 6th Fleet directs the U.S.S. America to launch aircraft to assist the Liberty. At 2:54 p.m., the fleet is advised of the torpedo attack. And then at 3:16 p.m., the commander of Task Force 60 directs both the America and Sarasota to launch 4 aircraft in defense of Liberty, remain over international waters. At 4:22 p.m., the comm station in Morocco is reporting that Liberty reported unable to identify attackers. Hilo circle ship after attack, possibly Israeli. Now something to keep in mind at this point is that a lot of the crew of the U.S.S. Liberty by now knew who was attacking them, but at this point the rest of the fleet didn't know who the attackers were. But as we saw, it was mere minutes earlier at 4:14 p.m. Liberty time that Israel contacted the White House directly to inform them of the erroneous attack on a U.S. ship. And it's not until 5:21 p.m. that report would go out to the rest of the fleet. And then we can see at 5:29 p.m. use of force withdrawn. And then by 6:49 p.m. Liberty time, all aircraft recalled and accounted for. Now there's quite a bit of controversy about the aircraft that were launched to go help the U.S.S. Liberty.
There was a flash message, as I recall, from one of the carriers that said they had launched ready aircraft. The launching of ready aircraft, you understand, that is typically nuclear-armed aircraft.
Those aircraft were brought forward, and I believe they were launched before we went into condition November. One of them was taxied forward to Cat 1. And it was it had like a shroud around the underside of the fuselage, and it had Marine guards escorting the A4. So that was a very unusual experience. I've never seen anything like that.
I'm Admiral Larry Geis, the commander of Task Force 60.
He was very upset. He told me he knew it was going to be hushed up, and I wasn't to say anything about it, but he had to get it off his chest, that he had sent aircraft and notified Washington, obviously via the Criticom network, because it got to Bob McNamara and Lyndon Johnson, and he had the aircraft recalled by Robert McNamara. So he said he reconfigured a flight of aircraft with aircraft incapable of carrying nuclear weaponry and relaunched it. He again notified Washington. Again, Robert McNamara ordered the aircraft recalled. He challenged the order, and Lyndon Johnson came on. Said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He would not embarrass his allies.
You recalled planes sent to rescue the Liberty.
I'm absolutely certain that's false.
You didn't send a signal to the 6th Fleet?
Absolutely not. I don't know what the hell happened, and I haven't taken time to find out.
He hasn't taken the time to find out. Really. Now looking again at the communications times, the first call for help made it out at 2:35 p.m. Liberty Time, and a couple minutes later at 2:37 p.m. Liberty Time is when the reports of the motor torpedo boats would be coming in. At 2:50 p.m. Liberty Time, the commander of the 6th Fleet, Vice Admiral William Martin, directs the U.S.S. America to launch aircraft to assist the U.S.S. Liberty. And then we see at 3:16 p.m. Liberty Time, which is 26 minutes after the first launch, the commander of Task Force 60, Rear Admiral Lawrence Gaius, directs both the U.S.S. America and the U.S.S. Saratoga to launch 4 aircraft in defense of Liberty. So we can see 2 different launch orders being given out within a 26-minute time frame. Why is there a second order to launch? And why did it take another 26 minutes? These time frames fit with the allegations that the planes were recalled by Robert McNamara and President Johnson. And remember, President Johnson allegedly said that he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He wouldn't embarrass his allies. So how did President Johnson know by that point it was his allies that were attacking the Liberty? Remember, it wasn't until 4:14 p.m. Liberty Time that Israel contacted the White House directly to let them know what was going on. And also something else to consider, the U.S.S. America had Phantom F-4s that have a top speed of over Mach 2, which means they could have been over the Liberty within 10 to 15 minutes of being launched. So what happened to any of the planes that were launched to help the U.S.S. Liberty?
The planes that they said they were sending to us never arrived.
No planes ever made it to the Liberty, furthering the likelihood that the accounts about Robert McNamara and President Johnson recalling the planes are true. And it wouldn't be until 5:29 p.m. Liberty Time that the Joint Chiefs of Staff would rescind the use of force in a telegram sent to the United States Commander-in-Chief of the European Command. And the United States Commander-in-Chief of the European Command at that time was one Lyman Lemnitzer, and we'll come back to him shortly. We can also see that 12 minutes earlier, U.S.S. Liberty Time, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Navy European Command informs the commander of the 6th Fleet that only news releases will be at the Washington level. And the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Navy European Command at that time was John McCain Jr., the father of longtime Senator John McCain III. And with the Liberty being escorted by the 6th Fleet en route to Malta to be repaired, the cover-up of what happened would begin, and the crew would be sequestered away from the press in order not to speak to anyone about what happened, even family.
So they told what they seen in that, and after a while he put his pins back on and he says, I don't want you guys talking about this at all to anybody, your shipmates. Don't be giving any interviews here while we're in Malta. He says anything that has to be told through your division officer, through your captain. Don't be talking to your family about it. I mean, he was very specific.
They removed me from that ward and put me into a single room. I noticed that I had a name tag with Smith on, and right after I noticed that, an officer came in and told me that from now on my name is Smith. I was never on the Liberty, and I was never ever to talk about it to anyone. I still have 53 pieces of shrapnel in me today.
The Navy Board of Inquiry would not admit testimony about the jamming, the recall, the unmarked planes, the shooting of life rafts, and other material that we tried to present.
I absolutely can't see why our American newspapers and TV people have helped to cover this up, but not covering some of our stories.
So what actually happened to the USS Liberty on June 8, 1967? Was it actually an accident? That's the official story, for which Israel apologized and said they thought the Liberty was an Egyptian ship, and they paid the victims' families about $7 million in compensation. Or was it a deliberate attack by Israel in an effort to sink the Liberty with no survivors? In which case you have to wonder, why? Why would they deliberately try to sink the Liberty? And there's a few theories about that. One was to sink the Liberty to cover up that Israel launched the first strikes of the war, something they figured the Liberty would have picked up in transmissions. Another was to cover up the fact that they would attack the Golan Heights, though the United States had previously told them not to. And another theory behind the attack was to get the United States into the war against Egypt and their allies. Now, I don't think Israel would risk attacking a United States Navy ship simply to cover up the fact that they launched the first strikes in the war. And it certainly didn't matter to Israel about attacking the Golan Heights, as they did just that on June 9th, the day after attacking the Liberty. Now, there's a case to be made for trying to get the United States into the war against Egypt and her allies. But again, I highly doubt Israel would risk sinking a U.S. Navy ship to achieve this solely on their own accord. Which opens up another avenue. Could it have been a false flag attack plotted by both Israel and the United States?
I never myself accepted the Israeli purported explanation. Accidents don't occur through repeated attacks by surface vessels and by aircraft. It obviously was a decision taken pretty high up on the Israeli side.
A decision taken pretty high up on the Israeli side. And let's have a look at this CIA document from October of 1967, which was 4 months after the attack, but not released until nearly 40 years later in March of 2006. And someone, who is still redacted, said it was Moshe Dayan, the Israeli defense minister, that ordered the attack on the U.S.S. Liberty, and that one of his generals called it pure murder. On June 4th, the day before the war started, Israeli defense chief and Mossad director Meir Amit was in Washington discussing what was about to happen.
I told him, look, we don't want even one soldier from you. All what we want from you to stop the Russian coming into the arena, and number two, to help us after the war. So when I finished, he asked me 2 questions. One, how long it will take? I said 1 week. How many casualties? I told him less than the War of Independence. So I asked him, Mr. Secretary, what do you advise to me? Can I go home now or stay here until things will clear up? He said, no, you go home, your place is there now. I drew the conclusion that it was a green light.
And he means a green light from Washington to start the war. Something Defense Secretary Robert McNamara denies.
Absolutely not. Because at that point, President Johnson and I and Dean Rusk had fully agreed that we must keep the U.S. in a position where if Israel called on us for military assistance to turn back the attack by Egypt and possibly turn back an attack by Egypt with the support of the Soviet Union, we had to be in a position that we could obtain the support of the American people and the Congress for applying military force in support of Israel. And we would not have that support if Israel had attacked Egypt. So our position was, no, don't initiate the attack. And I have no basis for believing that the Israeli you spoke of received any other indication from me than that.
So they were discussing about the upcoming war, but McNamara says in order to get the American public on board so the United States could support the side of Israel, the Arab coalition led by Egypt must be the ones who initiate the first attacks. And if this has a familiar ring to it, that's because we've seen the same basic plays, from the same playbook, from the same people, in 1964, with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, when they blamed the communist North Vietnamese, in torpedo gunboats no less, for unprovoked attacks on U.S. Navy destroyers. Only that never happened.
No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen.
But of course this lie gave license to Lyndon Johnson to escalate the Vietnam War exponentially. But would these guys actually sink a U.S. Navy communication ship on purpose and blame it on Egypt just so they can drag the United States into an Arab-Israeli war? Well, let's go back again just a couple of years before the Gulf of Tonkin lies, to 1962, and have a quick peek at Operation Northwoods. And here we see Lyman Lemnitzer again, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he signed off on Operation Northwoods, which included plans for things like terror campaigns in American cities, harassment of civil air and attacks on surface shipping, hijacking civil air and surface ships, and even faking that a Cuban plane shot down a passenger airliner from the United States. And these guys were in the administration back then as well, but thankfully President Kennedy quickly put the brakes on such a nefarious plan. But I bet Johnson and McNamara would have approved. But again, going back to the times of the launch orders to rescue the Liberty, there were 2 launch orders given, beginning at 2:50 p.m. Liberty time, 15 minutes after the first SOS message was sent out by the Liberty. But someone ordered those planes recalled, twice. And who would that be? That would have to be somebody really high up. No planes ever made it to the Liberty. And Israel didn't contact Washington until 4:14 p.m. Liberty time, an hour after the second launch order was given. And remember, the story goes that those recalls came from the White House, where President Johnson allegedly said that he didn't care about the Liberty and he didn't want to embarrass his allies, meaning Israel. But how could Johnson know it was his allies, Israel, when they didn't call to explain for more than a full hour later, which is something that some survivors of the Liberty still wonder about.
We didn't know who was attacking us. They didn't know who was attacking us. Well, I don't know how Washington can say, don't go, because they're friends of ours. So that's the thing that's always bothered me right there.
In the 2000s, recordings between the Israeli pilots in the tower came out, and they show that Israel knew the U.S.S. Liberty was an American ship from the reconnaissance flights earlier in the morning. And remember, they made 8 reconnaissance flights over the Liberty beginning just after 5 in the morning, so there's no way they misidentified the Liberty when they attacked it. Here's a few more recordings during the attack. Every year on the anniversary of the attacks, the survivors and their families gathered together to honor the 34 who lost their lives on the U.S.S. Liberty. In 1997, the Liberty's captain, William McGonigal, technically a commander at the time of the attack, and who had always publicly supported the official findings, had this to say.
For many years, I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the State of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened and why it came about that the Liberty was attacked 30 years ago today.